What's up, Ragin Nation? How's it going? This is Alex Yu, and you're watching the TF Movie Show. This is just the web series we're talking about the Transformers live action movie franchises, episode number 33. And in this episode, we are going to answer the question on everybody's mind. A lot of people are thinking this, a lot of people are very, very confused. Remember coming out of watching Bumblebee in the theaters, and you're telling yourself and your buddies that it was so awesome. And then later you ask this question: is it a prequel or a reboot? It feels like a reboot. And a lot of people are happy that they feel like the franchise was rebooted, but at the same time, it felt like a prequel to the 2007 Transformers film directed by Michael Bay. Didn't it feel like that? It felt like a prequel, but at the same time, it also felt like a reboot. So what is it? Well, we're going to answer that question right now in this episode. I'd like to give a big shout out to Merlin for sending me this tweet. In your opinion, is this a prequel or a reboot? Thank you for your tweet, Merlin. And I'd like to also thank you for mentioning in your opinion. This is very important because there is no definitive answer. There is no definitive answer at all. There's no official answer. You could not even go to a producer of this movie or even ask Travis Knight, and they will not be able to give you a definitive answer. True story. It's absolutely true because of a lot of reasons, and we're going to go into that. Now, before I go into that, I'd actually like to bring to your attention to this article right here, predicting Transformers movie future after Bumblebee's box office troubles. This came from Screen Rant, and you really should not believe everything you read on the internet. As soon as some people read this, they're going to feel like, oh my god, Bumblebee's in trouble. They're going to believe every word that is in this article. And the truth is that it is not in trouble. Bumblebee is not in trouble. In fact, it is a success. I'm going to continue reading on this article. There's a sub-headline that says no Trans movies are in development right now. Absolutely not true. Absolutely not true whatsoever. And then it goes on to talk about reboot. Okay, I want to read you these paragraphs. Whatever movies do come, it seems quite likely that the future of Transformers movies involve a more overt reboot of the series in some form. Bumblebee was a stepping stone for this, and given the positive response comes across in spite of what came before, the direction is clearly the route to success. Any financial complications come from the Bay backlash rather than anything representative of the movie itself. Now, that part is true. If there is any negative energy about this movie, or even like any kind of stigma about a sixth Transformers film focused on Bumblebee, then that is because of how people felt about Transformers last night. But make no mistake about it, Bumblebee is a critically successful and positively reviewed film, and it is a great Transformers film. There is a huge positive response, and this is a start of something new. I'm going to go on to read the second paragraph. The type of reboot is up for question. It would be very easy to continue slowly diverging from the past, telling stories that aren't explicitly in or out of continuity with what came before. However, if Bayphobia was a factor for Bumblebee, it may be more recommendable to cut losses and have a complete start. That would mean Bumblebee has no narrative role in the future, although its standalone nature means that doesn't leave too much hanging. Okay, now this is the part where I completely disagree with, because I don't think it's a great idea to have a complete restart. The fact is that Paramount does not want to give the big middle finger to Michael Bay after all that he has done for the studios by just completely cutting their losses and just starting fresh and forgetting everything that he's done. They don't want to do that. They have a good relationship with Michael Bay, so they're not going to just cut him off and just start fresh. They're not going to do that. They're going to use his films and this Bumblebee film as a stepping stone for something that's new to come. Now, does that mean that they're going to completely reboot it? No, they're not going to completely reboot it, but there is going to be some reboot in some shape or form or another. Now, that doesn't quite answer the question, so we're just going to move on to this article right here. The next Transformers movie won't be a reboot. It will be different. What does that even mean? Okay, let's go on to these some quotes from Lorenzo de Bonaventura, the producer. Rumors of a reboot have been grossly exaggerated. Reboot. I always hate that word because, for one, I'm not sure I really understand what it means. Come on. You know what it means. We're going to do another big Transformers movie. It is going to be different than the ones we've done before. Okay, I'm very happy to read that. I'm very happy to hear about that. They want to do a big one, but it's not going to be your typical Michael Bay style big giant explosion fest. They're going to do something different, probably more in the vein of this one, but on a larger scale. Course correction. It's not like we look at the elements of what we did before and go, well, let's not do this or let's not do that. It's more about how do you evolve the experience for the fans. Let's the fan have a new experience. When we did the first movie, at first there was a lot of pushback that we weren't doing it the way it was done before. My feeling was always that if we've done it, you would have gone. Well, I've already seen it, so how do you evolve things forward is, I think, the hardest thing, because you've got to retain why people love it, but at the same time, if you give them the same experience, they're going to be bored with it. Now, I'm very glad he said that, because I don't want to see the same thing over and over and over and over again. It's the same formula over and over again with a lot of these Michael Bay films, and I'm getting bored with it. It's the same stuff, really. It's the same, same formula, just different time, different setting. But at the end of the day, it's the same formula. I'm getting bored of it. But you still gotta keep that something about it that still connects with the previous ones. You need that connection, but at the same time, you want something different. Not too different that it feels completely disconnected, but still having some of those elements behind so that you can still connect with it, because you will be thinking about the previous movie when you watch the new one. Next, he says, where in the universe is Unicron? Okay, I'm going to be controversial. I'm not a fan of Unicron. It's too big. It's so big, it's beyond any sort of relatable thing. I think, for me personally, that doesn't mean it's not going to be in the series someday. I don't know that I've thought much about it, honestly, because we've been focused on this movie. Now, he's being completely transparent here. Unicron is not in the cards at all. Transformers Last Night left us with a cliffhanger, but Unicron is not in the cards. He just doesn't like it, and they don't know how they were going to fit in. And also, there's this talk of reboot, restarting, starting fresh. That means not continuing where Michael Bay left off. They're just going to leave it at that. I know a lot of fans are going to be disappointed, but the fact is that also, this is not the way Unicron is accurately represented. But I still know a lot of fans want to see it. Unicron can happen of three ways. The Michael Bay way, which he comes out of Earth. He could be an actual planet, a planet-eating planet, or he could not happen at all. Most likely, he's not going to happen at all from this point on, and then they will probably reimagine him later on in a different version. All right, but right now, he's not in the cards. Bumblebee is a success. They're going to work off of that, and that's a very small movie. They're not going to move into something big like Unicron for a while. That's the truth. Bumblebee is the key. I think we've learned something in this movie about tone, and I would think the next big Transformer movie is going to have. It's not like we're going to copy it, but we've learned something. There's more freedom than I think we originally thought in terms of what we can do. So, in the last 5 Transformers films, the first one set the tone for what the future Transformers films are going to be like. And they ended up with Revenge, Fallen, Dark of the Moon, Age of Extinction, Last Night. And if you really think about them, they all feel and look the same. It can look the same, but it shouldn't always feel the same. That's why a lot of times when they change up directors, it starts really giving us a breath of fresh air. They feel different, but they feel like, it's a fresh start, right? We have different visions, and you like each film equally but differently. Now, there's sometimes directors do a bad job once they change the directors, and then they say, bring back the old director. But the fact is that it gives the audience something fresh. And especially, I think, for an anomaly like Transformers, where they had the same directors for 5 films in a row, I think it needs to be changed up. It just needs to be done. And that is why Lorenzo de Bonaventura was quoted saying that they want to do a big film at some point in time, but they just don't want to keep it the same again and again and again. They don't want to do that. They want to do something different. And that big film could be, like a War for Cybertron film, which is something that we'll talk about in another episode. Anyways, I want to end his quotes by him talking about the final scene in Transformers. Someone described Bumblebee to me as 99% prequel, 1% not. I was like, what was the 1%? It is a scene where Optimus and all the other guys come to Earth at the end. I was like, that doesn't contradict anything we have said before. Who's to say that they haven't been around robots in disguise since then? That scene was always imagined, but in many different versions. We didn't do that scene until we shot the movie. because we felt the movie was going to dictate that scene a little bit. What happened is that you get to see Haley return to her family. Bumblebee needs to return to his family. Otherwise, what happened to poor Bumblebee? That was our thinking. Plus, Optimus said, we're going to Earth, we're going to regroup, and then we're going to go back. In our minds, they went back out. It had nothing to do with the other films and was completely about emotional journey of Bumblebee. Now, that's a very, very interesting statement. Because, in a way, he's telling people that you can look at it two ways. You can look at it one way, and that is, this film works as a standalone movie, and that scene actually is kind of like the final ending to that movie. It just shows that Bumblebee is at the end of his emotional journey, and this is how it's going to end. Like, this is how it concludes it all. Or you can look at it from a larger perspective, which is the way fans look at it, and that is, where does it go from here? Because we have the Michael Bay films, or we have something completely different, and that is, which brings us to the question, is this a prequel or a reboot? Because if it's a prequel, then this kind of contradicts Michael Bay's 2007 film. But if it's a reboot, then we are starting fresh, and those are all brand new characters. But he's just trying to say that it actually kind of works as both. Like, it's open-ended. Who's to say that the Transformers didn't come down and regroup on Earth and then go back out and then come back as protoforms and come in pods? You know, who's to say they didn't do that? Or it just works as a standalone movie. So he's speaking on both a fan perspective and also as a perspective as somebody who doesn't know very much about it. So in a way, Bumblebee works as a standalone film. And it really does. It really does work as a standalone film. But let's get into why I feel that this movie works more as a reboot. Now we're going to come to the question, is this a prequel or a reboot? Well, for me, in my opinion, it works more as a reboot. Let me just start off by saying why. This is the reason why. And this is not an important reason, but Bumblebee voice actor revealed. Now, this was posted back on the 3rd of December. Dylan O'Brien voices Bumblebee. Now, I think Dylan O'Brien voicing Bumblebee was a way better thing than Mark Ryan voicing Bumblebee. And in Transformers Last Night, it was a guy named Eric. I can't even remember his name, but it was a completely different actor. And changing actors is no stranger. The concept of changing actors is not something new in the Transformers franchise. After all, Hugo Weaving was replaced by Frank Welker, which was a really smart move, and a lot of other things happened in the past. Yeah, they ended up having Dylan O'Brien voice Bumblebee, and like I said, very smart move because Bumblebee's a young character, and I felt that hearing his voice totally worked for Bumblebee. Like, that was the Bumblebee that I know from a live action franchise. I would have totally gone with this, as the definitive voice for Bumblebee. Next, this scene right here. This all happens in an opening sequence of Bumblebee Cybertron with G1 characters. That's when I felt that, okay, this is a reboot. This is a full-on reboot. Just because look at how it opens. Like, this sequence is in your face, and right away you see RC, you see Wheeljack, you see Cliffjumper, you see Ironhide, Ratchet. You know, they're all there in the way that we know them as fans, and they look entirely different from the way they do from the Michael Bay movies. So that makes me feel like this is a reboot, and Cybertron looks completely different than the way it did in Dark of the Moon. So that's why I feel it's a reboot. Now, I want to really get into what this film, I believe, really is. And in my opinion, I think it's a reboot. To Paramount Studios' opinion, to Paramount Studios, it's a reboot. They just don't want to admit it, okay? They really don't want to admit it. Why? Because reboot is not only a word that Lorenzo de Bonaventura hates and claims he doesn't know what it means, but they actually know that reboot represents something negative in the movie world. You know, a lot of people say, like, oh, just reboot it. That means that the previous franchise or previous version of it sucked. Okay? Which, in a way, you know, it was disappointing with the last film. So that's why you reboot. And that's why there's that negative energy about the word. They don't want to say that it's a reboot because of what it means to their golden boy, Michael Bay. You know, that saying that rebooting the franchise a year after The Last Night is just, Michael Bay would be like, what the hell? Like, did I not make you guys like a couple $2 billion? Like, what the hell? You're rebooting my franchise? You know, they don't want to say that. And also to the fans, to the general audience, they generally don't like when things are rebooted. They're like, oh, another reboot, another remake. Like, when are they going to keep on, how many times are they going to keep on doing this? How many times, when are they going to get it right? So there's that negative energy, so they don't want to use the word reboot. But in actuality, it is a reboot. They don't want to admit it, okay? But I will say this, okay? I want to explain to you what, why, and when is a reboot. What is a reboot? Why do they do this? And when do they do this, okay? Well, there's only really 3 reasons. In my opinion, a reboot happens when the storytelling in the franchise has come to an end. And what I mean by that, let's look at Dark Knight Trilogy. Bruce Wayne's story has ended, okay? So therefore, it needs to be rebooted. Spider-Man Trilogy. Peter Parker's story has ended. Therefore, they need to reboot it. Like, also another one, Resident Evil. The last Resident Evil is called Final Chapter. Resident Evil Final Chapter. That's movie number 6. There's already a reboot in the works. That's why they need to reboot it. Now, another reason is the filmmakers and the cast do not wish to continue. I'm going to use the examples I used before. Christopher Nolan, Christian Bale. They don't want to continue forward because they know the movie has ended, and they want to move forward with other films, right? Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire. There's no need for them to come back. They don't want to come back. They want to explore new things. So therefore, they want to, Sony Pictures wants to reboot Spider-Man. Now, the final reason, and usually this is the most common reason, is that the last film in the franchise was not financially successful. And that's why they need to reboot it. This is the most common reason why and when studios reboot. Let's look at the Batman trilogy, or Batman saga, for example. We had Tim Burton, Joel Schumacher, and Drew Schumacher with Batman and Robin. That franchise was on a downward slope. Look at Aliens, and then Alien 3, and then Alien Resurrection. Another downward slope. The franchise ended up being, starting all over, but from a different perspective. They decided to do Aliens versus Predator, right, which was still terrible. But the fact is that they decided not to continue with more Alien films, okay? Now, reboots, I'm just going to name a couple of reboots that are very, very famous. Dark Knight Trilogy, Daniel Craig Bond series, Spider-Man, Zack Snyder's DC Extended Universe, and J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. Those are reboots that are clearly reboots, okay? Now there's something that I'd like to mention to you called retcons, okay? What's a retcon? Well, retcon has happened in a couple of franchises, and I'm going to name 3 of them. X-Men Days of Future Past, Terminator Genesis, and Superman Returns. Now, these are films which actually can use themselves to ignore other films in the past. So other films that have happened in the past, they use this film as a tool to start fresh. For example, X-Men Days of Future Past, okay? They ignore a lot of things, or they kind of push the reset button. Now, this is done intentionally in a storytelling way, so this kind of doesn't count as a retcon, but it definitely resets where they left off. Now, true retcons are Terminator Genesis and Superman Returns, because they ignore films like Rise of the Machines and Terminator Salvation. Terminator Genesis takes place after Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Superman Returns ignores Superman 3 and ignores Superman 4 Quest for Peace, and it takes place after Superman 2. So that's a retcon. The reason why I'm explaining this is because that's another thing that Bumblebee is. It's a reboot, and it's also a retcon, okay? Now, last thing I want to explain is a prequel, because the question is it a reboot or a prequel? Well, what is a prequel? It's obviously a film that happens before a film that already, was released, okay? But there's a very specific trilogy which works as both a reboot and a prequel. That's the brilliant Rise of the Planet of the Apes trilogy. First one directed by Rupert Wyatt, second and third one directed by Matt Reeves. This is a very, very superb trilogy. All 3 films are great, but this trilogy works as a prequel and a reboot. It works as a reboot on its own, as its own standalone franchise, and it also works as a prequel to the 1968 original. It truly does. And that is why I'd like to say that Bumblebee, if you were to ask me what it is, there is no definitive answer, but in my opinion, it's a reboot. The studios don't want to admit it, but it also works as a standalone film, it works as a reboot, it works as a retcon, and it works as a prequel. It works as a standalone film because, well, you can just watch it and then not even watch the previous films and not even care about what happens next, okay? It's a standalone film. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It works as a reboot because they do completely new things here, okay? Now, it works as a retcon because there are some elements that connect with the first film from Michael Bay, but it completely ignores all the other films like Transformers, Revenge of the Fallen, Dark of the Moon, Age of Extinction, and Transformers Last Night. For example, it ignores that Bumblebee was in World War II, right? You know what I'm saying? So that works as a retcon. And it also works as a prequel. Like, it's a direct prequel to the Michael Bay Transformers 2007 film. So if you ask me, there is no definitive answer. It's whatever you want it to be. But if I had to say what it is a reboot. Because they're using Bumblebee as a tool to restart a new franchise moving forward. We're going to see all new films. We're not going to see where Transformers Last Night left off with Unicron. We're not going to see that. Michael Bay's not coming back, at least not as a director, but still as a producer. But we're not going to see that vision anymore from this point on. And Lorenzo de Bonaventura agreed that we can't do the same thing over and over again. We're going to have big movies like Michael Bay's movies so they can make the big money, but without Michael Bay's vision. Mark my words. So, it's a reboot. I'm just going to go flat out and say it is a reboot, and it is a reboot because I said so. No, not because I said so. It's in my opinion. But you can believe whatever you want it to be. But I'm going to tell you that whatever movies come next is going to more solidify that this film is a reboot. But Lorenzo de Bonaventura said many months ago that he said that, well, we're not really rebooting it. We're not really making it as like a full-on prequel, but it still contains some of the, and he quoted saying this, the DNA of the first film. And they're mostly just using the DNA of the first film, not the sequels, just the first film. And that DNA really is just Bumblebee as a Camaro. That's all it really is. And, you know, a couple of visual cues like the way he works. But yeah, it does contain DNA from the original. But let's treat this from this point on as a fresh new start. Okay? So there you have it. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this comprehensive video episode about whether Bumblebee is a prequel or a reboot. I'm going to call it right now. It's a reboot. It's a fresh new start. They just don't want to call it that because reboots do not typically happen a year after the previous film. Although Transformers Last Night was a financial failure, they typically don't reboot that soon. You know what I'm saying? They were obviously expecting Transformers Last Night to be a huge success, and then they're going to use Bumblebee as a full-on definitive prequel if it was a success. Now, because it was a failure, they do not want to call it a prequel or a reboot. They're just going to say that, well, it's kind of like its own thing. We'll see where it goes from there, from that point on. Okay, and that's what they're doing. Okay, as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like me on Facebook, The Ragin Nation, also follow me on Twitter, Ragin Nation. My name is Alex Yu. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Peace.